Ethical egoism. According to your textbook by Russ Schaefer Landau, ethical egoism is the view that actions are morally right just when and because they best promote one's self-interest. So you should do whatever best promotes your self-interest. I should do whatever best promotes my self-interest. And the sense of should here is one of moral obligation. So I am morally obligated to do whatever best promotes my interests. Even if I feel like promoting your interests at the cost of my interests, I am obligated to promote my interests. And the same with you. Even if you feel like helping me out at some cost to yourself, you morally may not do that. You, in fact, are morally obligated not to do that. You must do whatever promotes your self-interest. Okay, and not just promotes it, but maximizes your self-interest. So you have to do the thing that best promotes your interest, not even something that's good for you. You have to do what's best for you. Now I've had you skip the chapter on psychological egoism, which is the view that in fact everyone does what they think maximizes their self-interest. So on psychological egoism, we may be wrong about what maximizes our self-interest, but nonetheless, we do what we think maximizes our self-interest at all times. In fact, we can't do anything else, they say. Schaefer-Landau rolls out various objections to this psychological thesis, and that's what it is, a psychological thesis. It's not really a moral thesis. And if you're interested in that, you should check that out. But I will take it as obvious that we do not do what we think is in our best interest at all times. This is Schaefer-Landau's argument for ethical egoism. Premise 1, if you are morally required to do anything, then you must have a good reason to do it. Now that seems plausible. As we talked about in the first lecture, if you are morally obligated to do something, there must be some reason for you to do it. In fact, some really good reason, because moral reasons trump all other reasons. So if you really are obligated to do something, there better be a really good reason for you to have to do it. So this one's not that problematic, you may think. Premise 2. If there is a good moral reason to do something, then doing it must make you better off. Therefore, if you are morally required to do something, then doing it must make you better off. Now, this is actually not even taking us to ethical egoism, because ethical egoism is a view that we are morally required to do not what makes us better off, but what makes us best off. Right? So this would need to be changed. This premise would need to be changed. If there is a good reason for you to do something, then doing it must make you better off than any other way you could be. Or it must make you best off, or it must be optimistic for you. Now, one famous objection to ethical egoism is that this ethic makes, for no good reason, my interests all important. So egoism, ethical egoism, and I'll just talk about egoism in terms of ethical egoism. So when I say egoism from now on, I just mean ethical, not psychological egoism. Egoism must explain what justifies an absolute bias in favor of our own interests over others. Okay, so if there's one last piece of pie, and I kind of want the pie, and you're starving to death, you're at your last moments if you don't eat, egoism must explain why I should favor my mild interest, my very moderate interest in the pie, over your very serious need for the pie. Now, perhaps our preferences and desires for ourselves do give us some reason to do things, but are they the only reasons that we have to do things? So you have lots of desires for yourself. You would like to graduate college. You would like to get a good job. You would like to get, you would like to fall in love and have a great marriage relationship, and so forth. You would like to do those things. And your deep desires for those things do give you reasons to do certain things, like take this class, like take your quizzes and take your tests and stay at home late at night studying instead of doing other fun things. So absolutely, your preferences and desires give you some reason to do things. But it isn't as if your preferences and desires are, first of all, only for your own good. You have plenty of preferences and desires for the good of other people, namely those who you love. You can recognize, I think, that there are reasons for you to do things that do not redound to your preferences or desires. So sometimes you just recognize that you have an obligation, say, to pay back a loan. And that isn't because you desire to pay back a loan, and you'd prefer that you don't have to pay back a loan, but you recognize that you have an obligation to pay back the loan. So we call reasons for action, like I have a reason to study so I can graduate, and I have a reason to graduate so I can make money, and so forth. Those reasons are called practical reasons. And two big branches, not the only two big branches probably, but the two big branches of practical reason are prudential reasons, reasons that concern benefiting yourself, and moral reasons. Like, so for instance, you have a prudential reason to study hard. You have a prudential reason to eat right. You have a prudential reason to exercise. You have moral reasons to pay back debts that you owe. You have moral reasons not to hold people at gunpoint and take their money, things like that. So definitely we have our preferences and desires for ourselves, but they are not the only practical reasons we have. We have moral reasons. And beyond that, we have, even among our preferences and desires, we have preferences and desires not only for our good, but for the good of others, namely those who we love and who we like. Here's a more radical suggestion. Maybe it isn't just the case that the well-being of others and the desires of others give us a small reason to satisfy them. What if they give us equal reason? So suppose there's one last piece of pie and we each want it. Why should I prefer my getting it over your getting it? I could see if maybe the pie was mine, but let's suppose the pie isn't mine. Let's suppose we just came across it. I could see if maybe I baked the pie for myself, but let's suppose I didn't. I suppose if I'm hungrier than you, I may have some special claim to it, but let's suppose I'm not. Let's suppose we're just identical twins and there's really no difference between us, okay? And there's no morally relevant difference between us. The only difference between us is that I want the pie for me and you want the pie for you. Why should I, in the last analysis, prefer my getting the pie over your getting the pie? I have no special claim to the pie. And if I have no special claim to the pie, why should I really want that I get the pie? It's not morally interesting that I'm me and that I'm the one feeling that I want the pie. Or suppose Jack and Jill enter a game show to compete for $1 million. Why should Jack or Jill prefer that he or she win the money? It's the most natural thing in the world. You just assume that, of course, Jack wants that he wins the money and Jill wants that she wins the money. But watching this show, why should we, if we're watching the show, why should we want Jack to win rather than Jill? We would ask questions like, well, who needs the money more? Or who worked harder to prepare for the show? Or whatever. We would ask various questions before we felt justified thinking that, oh, it would be better, it'd be a better world if Jack or Jill won the $1 million. But why shouldn't Jack and Jill be doing the same thing? Why shouldn't they take a neutral perspective and say, oh yeah, Jack, I realize you, Jack, want to win it, and I realize Jill wants to win it, but what does that have to do with anything? The question is, who has a better claim to it? And then we should wish that whoever has a better claim to it win it, even if that's not me, right? But very few people think this way, but it is a bit of a mystery. Surely we evolved to care about our interests because our genes want to get passed on, and people who cared more about or equally about the interests of others did not pass on their genes as well as people who cared more about themselves. So we have inherited this deep prejudice in favor of our getting our way. But maybe that's all it is just a deep prejudice that we get our way. And this becomes really clear once you have kids, because even if you're a pretty egoistic person, once you have kids, you kind of stop being an egoist because you care that they get what they need. So much so you would die to protect them. Okay. But again, why is that the case? Well, very plausibly, parents who cared more about strangers than themselves didn't pass on their genes. Parents that cared more about themselves than their children didn't pass on their genes either. So we evolved to have this massive bias in favor of ourselves and especially our children, even over ourselves. Here's another objection to ethical egoism, the argument from paradigm cases. This is sort of just like another argument from horrible acts objection. If egoism requires rape, murder, and torture, then it's wrong, right? If any ethical theory requires killing, raping, or stealing just because such actions promote one's self-interest, then that theory cannot be true. But ethical egoism sometimes does require things like killing, raping, or stealing just because they sometimes promote your self-interest. So ethical egoism cannot be true. Wouldn't you like $1 million? And suppose you could steal $1 million and not get caught. Well, then surely it would be in your self-interest to steal $1 million. Okay. And thus, on this view, you would be morally required to steal the $1 million. Suppose your company is considering promoting either you or your rival for your dream job. And suppose that you figure out a perfect crime so that you can kill your rival without ever getting caught, in which case you'll be a shoo-in for the promotion. If ethical egoism is true, you are not only morally permitted to kill your rival, but you are obligated to kill your rival. This just seems wildly counterintuitive. It seems to us obvious that it's immoral to do that. Your own intuitions are speaking against that. So ethical egoism cannot be true. Okay, well, let's look at this. Let's see if the ethical egoist can rebut this at all. With regard to, here's the argument that I just gave. With regard to premise one, well, maybe our intuitions against killing and raping and stealing are just the product of societal training, right? Maybe we've just been brainwashed to be nice. But maybe if we were, say, Mongols, we wouldn't think that killing and raping and stealing was bad just because they promoted our self-interest. We might think, yeah, that's obvious, that you should kill, rape, and steal if you can get away with it. Okay, so maybe our intuitions are suspect. Or maybe we evolved to be disinclined to kill, rape, and steal because that highly uncooperative behavior tended to be punished caught by the tribe and punished by the tribe, and so actually wasn't adaptive. But just the mere fact that we didn't evolve to take advantage of these opportunities when they presented ourselves doesn't mean that we shouldn't take advantage of these opportunities when they present themselves. Now, another type of objection we could have is that maybe premise two is wrong. We're going to explore that in a bit. Maybe it's not true that ethical egoism sometimes requires us to do such horrible things just because it is sometimes in our self-interest. Okay, so let's take a fresh start. It seems, at least at first blush, that morality and self-interest sometimes part ways. Now, often they do seem to align. Paying your debts is good for you and morally required. So pay your debts, you're going to have bad credit, you'll have trouble buying cars and houses and so forth. So it is to your advantage to pay your debts. Okay, but it is also morally, prima facie, morally obligatory to pay your debts. So those things align. But sometimes what is in your self-interest and what you seem morally required to do seem not to align. So sometimes you can get away with rape, murder, and theft or whatever, okay? And in those situations, the question arises, which way should you go? Should you go the way of self-interest, or should you go the way that morality seems to require? And the ethical egoist basically avoids this problem by saying that self-interest and morality cannot part ways, that anytime it seems to you that morality and self-interest parts ways, it is just because you are under the spell of some false mores, and that really morality requires you to do what is in your self-interest. And this is basically what Plato argues in his masterpiece, The Republic. And this is discussed in Book 2 of The Republic when the character of Socrates, Plato was writing a philosophical dialogue in which Socrates, sort of the character Socrates, who was a real person and was Plato's teacher, and who Plato drew a lot of inspiration from and used as a character in his philosophical dialogues to usually, in almost all cases, express Plato's own view. And so in Book 2 of The Republic, Socrates is forced to consider this thought experiment. And the thought experiment begins as so. There's a poor shepherd in the ancient land of Lydia. There's Lydia, so in modern day Turkey. Okay, but this was part of the Greek-speaking world at that time. And he finds a magic ring of invisibility. And when the shepherd realizes its power, he goes to the capital and takes over the kingdom and rules it himself. And I want to read you the passage. Here we have Socrates' his student gives him this thought experiment. The story goes that this shepherd was in the service of the ruler of Lydia. There was a violent thunderstorm, and an earthquake broke open the ground and created a chasm at the place where he was tending his sheep. Seeing this, he was filled with amazement and went down into it. And there, in addition to the many other amazing things of which we are told stories, he saw a hollow bronze horse. There were window-like openings in it, and peeping in, he saw a corpse which seemed to be of more than human size, wearing nothing but a gold ring on its finger. He took off the ring and came out of the chasm. He wore the ring at the usual monthly meeting of shepherds that reported to the king on the state of the flocks. And as he was sitting among the others, he happened to turn the setting of the ring toward himself, toward the inside of his hand. And when he did this, he became invisible to those sitting near him, and they went on talking as if he had gone. He was amazed by this, and fingering the ring, he turned the setting outward again and became visible. So he experimented with the ring to test whether it indeed had this power, and it did. If he turned the setting inward, he became invisible. If he turned it outward, he became visible again. As soon as he realized this, he arranged to become one of the messengers sent to report to the king. On arriving there, he seduced the king's wife, attacked the king with her help, killed him, and in this way took over the kingdom. Let's suppose then that there were two such rings, one worn by the just person and the other the unjust person. Now, no one, it seems, would be so incorruptible that he would stay on the path of justice or bring himself to keep away from other people's possessions and not touch them, when he could take whatever he wanted from the marketplace with impunity, go into people's houses and have sex with anyone he wished, kill or release from prison anyone he wished, and do all the other things that would make him like a god among humans. And in so behaving, he would do no differently than the unjust person, but both would pursue the same course. Okay, so what Glaucon is doing here is saying that we are just, not because we think morality sometimes requires us not to be rapists, not to be killers, not to be thieves. That's not why we are not killers. That's not why we are not rapists and thieves. We are not rapists and thieves because we can't get away with it. We can't get away with robbing banks. We can't get away with being a rapist. We can't get away with murder in most cases. And because we're going to probably get caught and probably get punished, we feel like it's not worth it for us, for our own skins, out of self-interest. Okay? So it isn't out of some sense of justice that we behave. It is out of self-interest that we behave this way. Here's a cute little video about this story.
What if you could do whatever you want and get away with it? Suppose, for example, you could steal from your best friend, and not only would he never find out it was you, he would also think you're the best friend ever for letting him cry on your shoulder. What a sap. Meanwhile, you're living it up with what you stole and have a devoted tool, a friend, to boot. Believe it or not, Plato talks about you in Book 2 of his Republic. Well, he talks about people like you, if you're the sort of person willing to do whatever it takes to get ahead, especially if you can do it without ever getting caught. Plato tells us a story, a myth, really, of a lowly shepherd who discovers a mysterious chasm, and inside of it was a magic ring. When he turned the ring so the setting faced his palm, he became invisible. That night, as he sat with other shepherds around the fire, he started turning the ring and noticed that others, thinking he'd left his place, started talking about him. In actual fact, he was invisible. He wasted no time seducing the queen, and, with her help, murdering the king and seizing power. Even though he committed a grave injustice, he certainly benefited, didn't he? Well, according to Plato, no.
The story of the Ring of Gyges raises the interesting question of whether you would do these things if you could get away with that. So the story of the Ring of Gyges raises the question of whether you would do such things if you could get away with it, and whether you should do such things if you could get away with it. Would you be foolish not to? And Plato's answer, as you were hinted at, was no. So let's review the dialectic. If ethical egoism is true, the demands of morality and the demands of maximizing self-interest cannot part ways. So what about rape, murder, and theft? May you do these things? In fact, should you do these things when they best serve your interests? The ethical egoist could just bite the bullet and say yes. The ethical egoist could just concede and say, all right, no, you're right. You got me. Ethical egoism is false. These things are just too obviously immoral. So ethical egoism is a false view. Or they could deny the assumption. They could say that rape, murder, theft, and so forth never serves our interests. And that's the way Plato himself ends up going. How could this be? How could it be that rape, murder, etc. would not be in your self-interest even if you had the Ring of Gyges, even if you had the powers of Superman? After all, revenge is sweet. Rape is clearly pleasurable or gratifying to those who find it so. Theft makes you money. If you knew you could get away with these things, how could it not benefit you to do them? Now, Plato's answer to this puzzle relies upon his theory of psychology, his theory of our soul. Psychology is just the study of the soul, as it were. The Greek word for soul is psyche, all right? And Plato's analysis of our psyche, of our soul, is, and remember, analysis is just breaking apart, all right, or decomposing. Or so, for instance, if you were a kid and you liked taking the radios apart in your household and unscrewing all the pieces and looking at them all, that is analysis, all right? Plato's analysis of our soul was based upon the idea that you can figure out when you have a different piece of the soul by finding when it is in conflict with another component of the soul. So it's a conflict-based way of analyzing our psychology. Moreover, he says, once we figure out what is causing our internal conflicts, we can alleviate those internal conflicts. And alleviating those internal conflicts is what happiness is. Now, that's going to be important, right? You're going to see why that's important. Maybe you could already see why a theory of happiness is going to be really important to an egoist, since an egoist says that you should do whatever makes you best off, right? And it isn't that crazy to think that what makes you best off is that which makes you happy. So what is Plato's view about the soul? Well, Plato says, we all know that we have appetites. We all know that there are things that we desire, like food, like sex, like, say, drugs. We know that we have these appetites, all right? These are, physical pleasures. We have a desire for being physically comfortable, right? We don't like to be cold. We like to put the blankets on. We like to be in our comfy jams, right? So we like eating tasty foods. We like lounging about. We have these various things, or these things are appetites, okay? But we are not purely appetitive beings. We are not beings that just go from seeking to satisfy one appetite to seeking to satisfy another appetite the second that becomes stronger. We are also somewhat intellectual or rational beings. We realize that there are some things that we want to do that we shouldn't do, right? So you, for instance, may be, as I often am, walking past the part. So for instance, you may struggle, as I do, with walking past the pizzas in the dining hall, right? I'm always tempted to go and stuff all that pizza into my face, right? But the intellectual part of me says, no, Dan, no, all those carbs are not good for you. You will get fat, Dan. It will make you get diabetes, Dan. You like being thinner. You like being thin more than you like the taste of that pizza. Long term, it's way in your best interest to walk past the pizza. So this intellectual part is at war with the appetite. And Plato has this lovely metaphor for it, or sort of mental image of what's going on here. He says, your appetites are sort of at your belly. Think about your appetites as like around your groin and your belly. And imagine them in the shape of a bunch of beasts, like a crocodile and a wolf and a snake and so forth, right? So imagine that you have all these like ravenous beasts, hyenas and so forth, these beastly heads projecting out of a belt around your loins, your midsection, right? And these beasts, they all want to be satisfied. They all want to pull you in their direction. right? So the food beast wants to make you a slave to food and wants to order your life around satisfying it with yummy food. Okay, and the sex beast wants to order your life around getting sex and getting ever more sex. Okay, and maybe you have an alcohol beast that makes you want to order your life around drinking alcohol and getting drunk and then recovering from that and going back out and partying again, and on and on and on. And the scary thing about these beasts is that Plato says they don't grow milder as you feed them. They don't become tame and mild as you feed them. In fact, they get worse. The more you feed them, the more they want to be fed. They grow bigger and they grow more powerful and they grow more ravenous. Oh, and one more thing. It isn't just that these beasts get bigger and hungrier the more you feed them, but they are also in conflict with each other. So obviously the beast that likes sex, that wants you to get lots of sex, is pulling you in one direction, whereas the beast that makes you want to eat lots of pizza is pulling you in a different direction, right? Because the beast that makes you want to eat pizza all the time is making you fat and not sexy, whereas the beast that wants you to get sex is pushing you to do things that will help you actually get sex. All right. So the beast that makes you want to party with your friends is at war with the beast that makes you want to lounge around in your bed all day. And against this crazy chaos of these beasts that get hungrier as they get fed, that are tearing you apart, pulling you, trying to pull you in different incompatible directions, is just your intellect, your reason, your rational part, which Plato analogizes to a little man inside your head. I think a lot about the Men in Black alien, that little man inside your head, right? At the controls, as it were. But it's worse than that, because at least the little man in black alien actually has his hands on the controls. But the little man inside our head is actually quite weak. He can't really force us to do things very much. He's not, as we would say, motivationally powerful. Okay. So while those beasts are screaming at us, he's just speaking in a whisper. No, you shouldn't do that. Right. And our bodies don't really listen to him very much. So is it hopeless? Are we bound to be slaves to our passions? No, because there's a third part of us. There's a third part of us that you can detect, just like you detected the existence of the appetites and the intellect. You detected the intellect because there are times when again, this is the conflict model of the soul. You detected the intellect because you detected there are times when your reason said, no, appetite, I shouldn't feed you. So there, boom, because of that conflict, that there are two things. Because one thing can't be in conflict with itself, Plato argues. So just the fact that your rational part says, no, I shouldn't have that pizza. No, I really have to stop drinking all this alcohol. No, this porn addiction or whatever is ruining my prospects in life. So there's that little part of you that's saying no to the belt of beast. So that tells you that it's there, that there is something here, but it's weak. And that's not the end of the story, however, because there's another conflict that reveals the existence of the third part of the soul. And this part you can feel when you have been pushed and pushed by others, or pushed and pushed around by your appetites for so long, you finally say no more. You finally just stop and plant your feet and say no more. I'm not going to get bullied anymore. I'm not going to get bullied anymore, bully. You're not going to scare me anymore. Sure, you could beat me up. You could throw me in the locker. You could take my lunch money and so forth, but I'm not going to passively assent to it anymore because I'm afraid of you, because of my appetites. No, I'm going to stand up and fight for what's right. This is wrong, and I'm going to fight for what's right. Okay, and this is when you become somewhat irrational, perhaps, but you say, that's it, that's enough. You go to the corner store and you buy that pack of cigarettes, and you're disgusted that you just paid another $10 for these cancer sticks that are literally going to kill you. You're paying to die early. And you say, this is ridiculous. I can't have the fun I used to have. It's costing me a car payment so I can die earlier. This is not right. Your intellect knows that's crazy, but it's only after you reach a certain point that you get so fed up that suddenly something stirs in you that says, to hell with this. And you grab that full pack and you crunch it up in your hand and you toss it into the trash can, and you begin the miserable, few weeks that it is to quit smoking. And that's the way it is with alcoholics when they've had enough, or any drug addict, or any porn addict, or any gambling addict. This is when you just say enough, and I'm not going to take it anymore, right? That's your thumos. That's what in Greek is called your thumos. It's the spirited part of you. It's the fighter in you, okay? And he represents this with a lion in your chest, okay? Now, unlike the intellect, the lion in you, unlike that little man in your head, the lion in you is powerful, potentially. He has an incredible amount of motivational power. And he's so powerful that when he's strong, he can defeat all these beasts, okay? The question is, how do you get this guy strong? Well, that takes training. Plato says that the lion grows strong in victory. So what happens is that you have no self-respect and your thumos is very low. And you get taken to your limit and you say no more. And you score a small victory. You manage to stop for a day. And stopping for just a day, or resisting that bully just once, levels up that line just a little bit. He gets a little bit bigger, okay, a little bit stronger. And the more victories that this lion gets, oh, I'm going to get my life together. I'm going to stop being such a loser. A lot of your professors would tell you, don't tell yourself you're a loser. Don't tell yourself that, you should have high self-esteem. I'm not going to tell you that. Plato wouldn't tell you that. Plato would say, no, absolutely you could be a loser. Absolutely you should have low self-esteem if you're a mess, right? But the question is, do you have to be a mess? And the answer to that is no. But you have to start having some reason to respect yourself. You're not worthy of respect yet, but you can be. You have to do something to earn that respect, not from others, but from yourself. And that comes from small victories, like it could be making your bed in the morning. Then it could be cleaning your room. Then it could be cleaning the rest of your apartment. Then it could be going on a walk every day. Then it could be throwing out all the crappy food in your house and buying good food and bringing only good food home. And every one of those moves in self-improvement makes your lion grow bigger, okay? Because he has grown stronger in victory. He has fought and defeated on this Monday, he has defeated that laziness beastie. On this Tuesday, he's defeated that sloppy beastie. On this Wednesday, he's defeated that Doritos Beastie, and on and on and on, right? And so he starts getting pride, and then he becomes stronger and stronger. Now, with regard to these appetites, Plato wants them to be as moderate as possible. He doesn't want you to dominate them in the sense of eradicating them all. Feeding the appetite of food a little bit is good because you need to eat to be strong. You need to eat to be healthy. You shouldn't feed that appetite too much, because if you do, you'll want more and more food. So you keep that appetite kind of weak, always wanting more, never sating it even for a little bit, but giving it enough so that you grow strong. Or if you have an appetite for sex, right? Good. Plato doesn't want you to get rid of your appetite for sex. It's good for you to have an appetite for sex, and you should have a certain amount of your life devoted to, procuring a sex partner and having sex and having children or whatever. Okay, that's all healthy, right? But you can't feed that sex beastie so much that it becomes a ravenous beast that tries to take over. Some of these appetites, however, really don't need to be fed at all. They should be starved out. They should be starved out of existence. So for instance, if you have an appetite for nicotine because you're a smoker, Plato would say, feeding this beast doesn't serve you at all. So what you should do is just starve that beast out. You should just quit smoking, right? Which is easier said than done. It takes a lot of thumos to do it. You should try to eradicate, if you can, your desire for alcohol if you're an alcoholic. You should try to eradicate your desire for pornography, because it's not like consuming pornography benefits you in any way. Some of the beasts should be starved out completely, but dominating this belt of beasts doesn't require you to eradicate all of them, just most of them. So for Plato, a happy soul, a happy person, is a person who has a wise intellect, a courageous and strong thumos, and very temperate appetites, right? Who has few appetites and none of them are very strong, all right? And that person who has these three aspects of the soul in that sort of harmonious union, with the reason directing a powerful thumos over moderate appetites, that person is going to have a harmonious soul. And whatever makes you better off is what promotes your inner harmony. Plato thinks that if you have inner harmony, you cannot possibly be unhappy. All right, so if you have inner harmony, you have everything you could possibly want. Inner harmony plus $1 million doesn't make you better off than inner harmony without the $1 million. Inner harmony plus a Ferrari doesn't make you any better off than inner harmony without a Ferrari. So if you have inner harmony, you have everything that could possibly make you well off. And importantly, if you don't have inner harmony, more of anything else can't make you better off. If you don't have inner harmony, then a Ferrari is not going to make you better off. If you don't have inner harmony, then a yacht full of women is not going to make you better off. Okay? And we see people with those things kill themselves all the time. If you've ever marveled at how a rock star could put a shotgun in his mouth and blow his head off when he's got groupies crawling over themselves to get to him, right? So he could have all the sex with beautiful women that he could want. and he has materially everything he could want, and he's famous, and you say, well, how could such a person kill themselves? But it happens regularly. Okay, why? Because their soul's off kilter. All right, oftentimes it's because they're drug addicts. Okay, so none of that stuff will help if you don't have inner harmony, and you can't be improved if you do have inner harmony. Okay, and as we have seen, right, the prime way to not have inner harmony is to be ruled by your appetites, because they can't be sated, they can't be satisfied, they go stronger through indulgence, and they pull us in different directions. Now here's the key move. Plato says, don't you realize that rape, murder, theft, all that stuff only feeds your appetites? It only makes them stronger. So you have the ring of Gyges, and it occurs to you to go around raping that girl, all right, that you've had your eye on. All you're doing by doing that is feeding your belt of beasts. You're throwing it a big red meat steak, okay, and making it even stronger. Or killing your rival, your innocent rival for the job, who didn't, do anything wrong to you. Or stealing from the bank or something like that. All you're doing is feeding that belt of beasts, making them stronger, having them, is being a slave really to them, and having them rule you, being guided by them instead of guiding them. All you're doing is quite literally enslaving yourself. And if you're enslaving yourself, then how could it possibly be that you're making yourself better off? So rape, murder, theft, all these things, they only make their perpetrators worse off. And ethical egoism says, do whatever makes you best off. So a wise ethical egoist will say not to do those things, even if you could with impunity, even if you had the ring of Gyges. Plato would say, I don't have to justify what the dumb ethical egoist would do. Would a dumb ethical egoist rape, murder, and thieve if he had the ring of Gyges? Yeah. But that's not my problem, right? My problem is defending ethical egoism. And the way I read Plato is that he's offering a sophisticated account of ethical egoism. And he thinks that a wise ethical egoist, that is to say, ethical egoism itself, does not say to do such things. So in conclusion, although some people find it quite plausible that there is no reason to value anything other than one's own well-being, it isn't at all clear why. It certainly is possible to care about things other than yourself, and we do this all the time. Even the most selfish among you care about people other than yourself. And if you have kids, you will certainly care about somebody who is not you more than you care about yourself, hopefully. And it's obvious that things other than ourselves actually matter, right? I think you all actually get that, even if you're really selfish, that other things do matter, right? Maybe you have a hard time caring about those other things that matter, but you appreciate that other things than your well-being matter. So given this, why be an ethical egoist? That said, if you're really attracted to this theory, consider that it may be best for you to avoid acts generally considered bad, like lying, cheating, stealing, raping, murdering, etc. Because those things, even if you can get away with them, in quotes, only further feed disordering aspects of your psychology and in the long run make you more miserable.